I'm Dr Laura Sangha. I'm Associate Professor of Early Modern History in the Archaeology and History Department. At the moment, I'm actually co-investigator on a major research project which is funded by the Leverhulme Trust, and that project is the material culture of wills, England 1540 to 1790. And that is a project where we have a very unique methodology, and we are combining cutting-edge AI technology with crowdsourcing volunteers to help us with creating our data. And we are using those techniques in order to transcribe and analyse 25,000 English wills. So it's a huge data set, particularly so usually a historian working on early modern England would look at maybe a couple of thousand wills if they were doing a research project. So by using this technology and by getting volunteers to help us, we're able to just massively scale up the research and hopefully find some really interesting things. So we're still in the middle of doing that, but that's the big research project for me at the moment. So I wanted to work with a creative fellow because of something that I've always felt about the discipline of history, which is that it's quite a unique combination of science and art. So I think most people think of it as a science because it's about facts, it's about finding evidence, it's about footnoting your evidence and using references and sort of working in quite a well-defined and quite solid way. But I've always thought that actually there's a lot of creativity that goes on as well, because to interpret your material, to understand it, and also to communicate its significance to other people, there's an awful lot of interpretation going on.
Hi, I'm Chris Hoban. I'm a singer, songwriter, composer, and I'm particularly interested in writing songs with historical and natural subjects. The themes and areas of research I explored with Laura, I had to be quite confessional towards her that when we started, I actually didn't know what early modern was. So the early modern period was very much a novelty to me.
Looking at wills, thinking about wills, we were also lucky enough to actually go and visit some original wills in person at the National Archives. So most of the time, the research that we do, we're working with digital reproductions of wills because the originals are obviously quite delicate, and also they're all in London. But we went to the National Archives and we had a look at some original documents, and it's really good because they bring you out these boxes full of what you think of as stereotypical ancient documents. They're just these yellowing pages, neatly folded, tied up with ribbons. So they're really evocative. And they also, I think that really brought home to us the kind of the materiality of these documents. So that kind of physical contact with the past, which I think really sort of telescopes things and brings the past into much closer contact with the present. And you can really get that sense when you look at an object that was produced at the time.
The second event that we had was here in the Digital Humanities Lab in the university, where Laura got a chance to talk about the project and how it was evolving, how it was expanding, in particular the Zooniverse, the crowdsourced side of things with over 3,000 volunteers worldwide, but also a chance to introduce me and to talk about our process of working together, how we'd had so many conversations and many meetings and bouncing ideas to and fro with Laura's expertise on rings in particular and interest in that, and spoons. I love the rings, I'm not so big on the spoons, but anyway, we can work on that. And then there was also the other stories that we'd come across through the volunteers, many of which were really rich and detailed in their biographical elements. It's often hidden in the middle of the wills themselves.
We were thinking about the wills, we were thinking about the objects, and within a couple of months, I think, Chris sort of came to me and said, I've started to write. And he was being inspired by particular wills to write songs that were based on particular wills. And we both sort of said, well, we need to start sharing this. We need to share some of the fruits of this collaboration, and also to draw other people into it. We really wanted to sort of, and I think this partly comes from Chris. I think Chris really likes to make connections with people, to find out what they're about, to sort of get them involved, and to sort of see what he can get from them that will also kind of then inspire his own art. So we decided what we wanted to do was to explore a different aspect of the wills, which was more to do with the kind of the visual aspect of it. So we had the wills themselves, which is obviously about communicating through words. We had Chris's songs, which is more about communicating orally. And we wanted to think about, okay, what would happen if you introduced pictures into this? So what we did was we decided we were going to have a print workshop, and this gave us the opportunity to work with the brilliant Double Elephant Press. And they came in and ran a workshop for us, but we provided the material that people were drawing their ideas from. So we provided people with wills, and then we gave them copies of Chris's lyrics that he'd written that had been inspired by the wills. And when people came in on the day, Chris also performed the songs. So we debuted some of the wills material for the first time, and then people illustrated the wills and the songs that they'd heard.
Then we had a trip to the V&A to go and see some of the original watches and material culture, beds even, and rings and jewellery in London. And that really helped us to, particularly me, to make sense of some of the stuff that we saw listed in the wills, often using language that we don't really use these days, like a valance. A pelmet, I had a vague idea what that was, but valances on bedsteads and things, to actually see them and think, oh, okay, that's why they wrote about them as much as they did. And then as the creation of the work was reaching a climax, we decided to put on a performance at the Devon and Exeter Institution in the middle of Exeter, which is a wonderful place, an ideal location for a performance of 9 of the 12 songs, one of which may well have been actually based on a will of someone who lived in that street, certainly in that parish, and in this amazing old 15th, 16th century building in the heart of Exeter, accompanied by a string quartet and a flute, a hurdy-gurdy player, a guitarist and a recorder player, and a chance for us to perform these songs in a wonderful location to a really interested crowd.
I talked about the wills and gave some historical context, but also talked about some of the themes that I had found most interesting in the wills. And then Chris performed the music alongside members both of the university and from the broader Exeter community.
And that felt like a terrific way to bring the first part of the fellowship to a natural close. And it was a great experience.
I think the thing that I've taken away that I'm really going to try to apply in my own research now is to do, quite fittingly, with listening, and to do with listening to my sources in a different way to the way that I did previously. And I felt like this is partly because of the way that you're trained. So you go through this training, history as science, you learn how to do it, you learn the method, and then you put that into practice. And sometimes that can end up making you a little bit blinkered, and you get set in your ways, and you get really good at doing that, but then you get a bit closed off to other approaches and how they might enhance or make what you're doing better. So I feel like working with Chris has sort of taken me back to that sort of joyful exploration that you can have when it comes to research.
I think the thing I enjoyed most about working with Laura and the team was being part of a wider team of collaborators. Writing songs can be a very lonely business. Sometimes it's just me and a pen and a piece of paper and a chewed knuckle as I'm trying to get to the heart of what it is I'm trying to say, what this person is trying to say, how I feel about the place. And to have lots of people, particularly Laura, but a wider team as well, who I can bounce ideas off and get further insight, is incredibly valuable. It's quite rare, and it made the process far richer and deeper, more meaningful and satisfying ultimately. And I feel very much like these works are collaborations. I feel like they are collaborations between myself and Laura, but the wider team, and also, of course, the testators themselves, because if it hadn't been for all of those little elements being put together in this time and this place, it wouldn't have turned out the way that it did.
The thing I enjoyed most about working with Chris is that it basically fulfilled a lifelong desire of mine to work with a musician, in that music has always been massively important to me. the first thing I got interested in when I was a teenager was music, and it was I was a horrible teenager and I had a really horrible time, but music was my safe space, and music was the place that I went to for that. To educate myself, I learned, I spent a lot of time reading books that were mentioned in popular music, and sort of learned a lot about the world just from that relationship between music and literature. But also, I have always felt that there's a really close relationship between history and song. So the earliest historians were all ballad singers and people that were kind of remembering a community's history by singing about it, and then that would be repeated. So it seemed to me like there's just a natural relationship between music, stories, history, and other things. So I think this fellowship has basically totally affirmed that, and really kind of, it's just been really rewarding in a way that often, you know, you do your research and it can be quite an individual process, and sometimes you wonder if anybody else is going to be interested in this. But working alongside Chris has shown me that yes, not only are people interested in it, but they will then come and learn about it, and they really want to hear about it, and they're really excited by the idea of a musician working with a historian, quite rightly. And it's just been incredibly fulfilling and rewarding.